Hi all, welcome back to operating system course. So in the last video we had seen about the process management, then we had seen about memory management and storage management, right? And how your operating system or what are the activities of your operating system in connection with these different types of management. Okay, so today we'll start our session by protection and security in your operating system, or how your operating system provides protection and security. Fine, first we'll talk about the protection. So if a computer system it has multiple users and it allows the concurrent execution of multiple processes, then access of the data or access to the data must be regulated. Your operating system has to check the access to that the data that is shared by multiple processes. So for that purpose there are some mechanisms that ensure that the files, your memory, CPU and other resources can be operated on by only those processes that have gained the power, or they have gained the authorization from the operating system. Say for example, so memory addressing hardware it ensures that the process can only execute within its own address space. So it cannot a process, say suppose it is executing, it cannot use other processes memory space. So the timer ensures that no process it can gain control of the CPU without eventually releasing control. So first we'll talk about protection, its definition. Okay. So the definition of protection is it is any process or mechanism for controlling the access of processes or users to the resources defined by your computer system. So this mechanism it must provide a means to specify the controls to be imposed and means to enforce these controls. So protection can improve the reliability by detecting the hidden errors at the interfaces between your component subsystems, and a protection oriented system it provides a means to differentiate between the authorized and unauthorized access or the usage. That is, early detection of your interface errors can often it prevent contamination of healthy subsystem by any other subsystem that is malfunctioning. So an unprotected resource cannot defend against use or misuse by an unauthorized or incompetent user. Okay, so this is about the protection. It is a mechanism for controlling the access of the processes or users to the resources that are defined by the computer system. Next, we'll talk about security. So, your computer system can have adequate protection. Okay, so it can have protection, but still it can be prone to the failure and it can allow inappropriate access. So, let's consider a user whose authentication information, okay, login information is stolen. So, say suppose her data could be copied or deleted even though the file and memory protection are working. So, it is the job of the security to defend a system from external and internal attacks. So, such attacks spread across a huge range and include viruses and worms, denial of service attacks, and identity theft, etc. So, prevention of some of these attacks is considered as operating system function in some computer systems, while other systems leave the prevention to policy or additional software. This protection and security it require the system to be able to differentiate among all its users. So most operating system how they differentiate a user is by their usernames that is associated with some ID. That ID we call it as UID or user IDs. Okay. Now these are the numerical IDs which are unique per person. So when a user logins to a system, the authentication stage or the login stage determines the appropriate user ID for the user. The user ID is associated with all the user processes and threads. So when an ID needs to be user readable, it is translated back to the username via the username list. So in some cases, we wish to differentiate among sets of users rather than individual users. Say, for example, the owner of a file on a Unix system may be allowed to issue all operations on that file, whereas a selected set of users may be allowed to only read that particular file. So to accomplish this, so what we can do is like we need to define a group name and set of users that are belonging to the group. So group functionality can be implemented as a system wide list of group names and group identifiers. So for users, you have user IDs, and for the group of users, you'll be having group IDs. Okay. And when these IDs need to be, in a readable format, user readable format, then those are translated back to the usernames or the group names via the list. Fine. The next one we'll talk about is the distributed system. The definition of distributed system is that it is a collection of physically separate, possibly heterogeneous computer systems that are networked to provide the users with access to various resources that the system maintains. Say, for example, this is one computer system, this is another system, and this is the another system. Okay, so the definition, it says it is a collection of physically separate systems. Okay, so in a distributed system, what will happen? So it is a collection of different computer systems, and these systems are connected via network. Okay, and these talk with each other, or they do some task, they collaborate on some task. So distributed system is nothing but it is a collection of physically separate computer systems that are connected via network, and they share the resources to perform a functionality. Okay, now, so what happens if you share the resources? So whenever you share the resources, your computational speed would be increased, data availability would be more, it would be reliable. Okay, so now that is distributed system. Now we will talk what is a network. Okay, so the definition of your network is it is the communication path between two or more systems. So distributed systems, they depend on networking for their functionality. So these networks vary by the protocols used, the distances between the nodes, and the transport media. So your TCP/IP is the most common network protocol used. Okay, so most operating systems, they support TCP/IP, including the Windows and the Unix operating systems. Some systems support the proprietary protocols to suit their needs. To an operating system, a network protocol, it is simply the interface device, that is a network adapter. For example, a device driver to manage it as well as a software to handle the data. So the networks, how are these classified? So these are classified based on the distance between their nodes, right? So LAN, WAN, and MAN are the classifications. So the first one, LAN, it is local area network. It connects the computers within a room, a floor, or a building. Then WAN, wide area network. It usually links the buildings, cities, or countries. So a global company may have a WAN to connect its offices worldwide. So these networks may run on one protocol or several protocols. So the next one is MAN, that is Metropolitan Area Network. It could link buildings within a city. Some operating systems, they have taken the concept of the networks and distributed systems further than the notion of providing the network connectivity. So a network operating system, it is an operating system that provides features such as file sharing across the network, and that includes a communication scheme that allows different processes on different computers to exchange the messages. A computer running a network operating system, it acts autonomously or it acts independently from other computers on the network. even though it is aware of the network and is able to communicate with the networked computers. So your distributed operating system, it provides less autonomous environment. The different operating systems communicate closely enough to provide the illusion that only a single operating system controls the network. Now, let's move on to the next topic, that is special purpose systems. So, till now we had seen about general purpose systems that we were familiar with. Okay, now we'll move on to this one. So, these special purpose systems are another class of computer systems whose functions are limited and whose objective is to deal with the limited computation domains. So, in these special purpose systems, we'll study about real-time embedded systems, multimedia systems, and handheld systems. So the first one is real-time embedded systems. So embedded computers are the most widespread form of computers in the existence. So these devices are found everywhere, right? From new car engines and manufacturing robots to DVDs and microwave ovens. So these tend to play, or they tend to have a specific task. So the systems that they run on are usually primitive, and so the operating system also, it provides limited features. So they have little or no user interface, and they prefer to spend their time monitoring and managing the hardware devices such as your automobile engines and robotic arms. Okay, so these embedded systems vary considerably. Some are general purpose computers, they run on the standard operating system such as Unix with special purpose applications to implement the functionality. On the other hand, others are the hardware devices with a special purpose embedded operating system which provides the functionality that is desired. So the use of the embedded systems, it still continues to expand. The power of these devices, both standalone units as elements of networks and the web, is sure to increase as well. Even now, the entire houses can be computerized so that a central computer, either general purpose or the embedded system, it can control the heating, the lighting, alarm systems, and even coffee makers. So web access can enable a home owner to tell the house to heat up before they arrive home. Someday the refrigerator, it may call the grocery store when it notices the milk is empty, right? So these embedded systems almost always run real-time operating systems. So this real-time system is used when the rigid time requirements have been placed on the operation of the processor or the flow of data. So it is often used as a control device in a dedicated application. Sensors, it bring the data to the computer, and this computer, it must analyze the data and it must adjust the controls to modify the sensor inputs. So system that you know control scientific experiments, medical imaging systems, industrial systems, and certain display systems are the real-time systems. Some automobile engine fuel injection systems, home appliance are also real-time systems. Your real-time system, it has well-defined and time fixed time constraints. Processing must be done within the defined constraints or the system will fail. For example, it would not do for a robot arm to be instructed to halt after it has smashed the car it was building. The real-time system, it functions correctly only if it returns to the correct result within the defined time constraint. So contrast to this one is our time sharing system, where it is desirable but not mandatory to respond quickly, or a batch system. Okay, so this was about real time embedded systems. The next one is multimedia systems. So most of the operating systems are designed to handle your conventional data such as your text files, programs, processing documents, spreadsheets, etc. Multimedia data, it consists of audio and video files as well as the conventional files. So your multimedia, it describes a wide range of applications that are popular in use today. So the files such as your MP3, movies, video conferencing, short clips, video clips, so previews of the clips. So these are all downloaded over the internet, right? So multimedia applications they may also include live webcast, broadcasting over the World Wide Web, okay, of the speeches or sporting events or even the live webcams that allow viewer in some place to observe the customers at a cafe in some another place. So these multimedia applications need not be either audio or video. Rather, it's a multimedia application that includes or it's a combination of both. As we had seen, multimedia data it consists of audio, video as well as the conventional files. So the data differ from the conventional data in that multimedia data such as your frames of video must be delivered or it must be streamed according to the certain time restriction. For example, 30 frames per second. Next, we will talk about handheld systems. So these include PDAs, that is personal digital assistants, such as Palm and Pocket PCs, your mobile phones, etc. Okay, so these use a special purpose embedded operating systems. Developers of these systems and applications they may face many challenges, most of which are due to the limited size of such devices. For example, a PDA is typically about 5 inches in height and 3 inches in width, and it weighs less than 1.5 pounds. So, because of their size, most of the handheld devices have small amounts of memory, slow processors, and small display screens. So, let's look at the limitations of it. Okay, so the amount of physical memory in a handheld system it depends on the device, but it is somewhere between 1 MB and 1 GB. So as a result, the operating system and applications they must manage the memory efficiently. So this includes returning all allocated memory to the memory manager when the memory is not being used. So second issue is that the developers of these devices they have to manage the speed of the processor used in the devices. So processors for most handheld devices run at a fraction of speed of a processor in PC. Faster processor require larger battery which would take up more space and would have to be replaced or recharged more frequently. Most handheld devices use smaller, slower processors that consume less power. Therefore, the operating systems and the applications must be designed not to tax the processor. The last issue is I/O, that is input output. So a lack of physical space it limits the input methods to these small keyboards, handwriting recognition or small screen based keyboards. The small display screen it limits the output options as well. So whereas a monitor for your computer it may measure up to 30 inches, the display for the handheld device is often not more than 3 inches. Okay. So, familiar tasks such as reading an email, browsing web pages it should be condensed into these small displays. So, some handheld devices use the wireless technology such as Bluetooth or 802.1, allowing remote access to the email and web browsing. However, for PDAs that do not provide the wireless access, downloading the data typically requires the users to first download the data to a PC or workstation and then download the same data to the PDA. So some PDA allow data to be directly copied from one device to another using infrared link. That's it for today. We'll conclude our session. Thank you.